Hello everyone, DM Gashbad here, and we are back with another Warhammer Fantasy Battles 6th edition Skirmish solo scenario. I've been painting lots of models for my Warhammer Quest game recently, and some of the models that I painted were these giant scorpions, and part of the reason that I wanted to paint those was because there's this scenario in the Warhammer Skirmish booklet called Water Rights, where you have a small band of warriors moving across the desert trying to get to water that is guarded by a group of giant scorpions. So I was really happy to finally be able to do that scenario, but when I went and finally printed out the thing and took a look at it, I found out you needed 4 giant scorpions. Who has 4 giant scorpions? You can't use them in any army, and even the Tomb Kings, where you can use them as tomb scorpions, a normal army can only have 3 of them. Warhammer Quest only uses 3, that's how many I have. So I was a bit disappointed about that until I went looking through some of the skirmish scenarios that they published online. Games Workshop for a long time just churned out tons of these Warhammer skirmish scenarios on their website. It was great. Not only that, 6th edition was the first time they actually created a Tomb Kings army book. And to go along with that release, they made a whole bunch of Tomb Kings oriented skirmish scenarios. One of which is an adaptation of the Water Rights scenario called They Came From Below. And instead of 4 giant scorpions, it uses 3 tomb scorpions. So perfect. That's what I'll be doing today. There's this oasis in the desert. It's guarded by 3 tomb scorpions, which are going to be not controlled by me. They're going to be the opponents. For my force making its way across the desert, I chose my savage orcs. I just kind of thought thematically that worked. The savage orcs come from the Southlands, they come from the jungles. So in order to get to the Old World, it seems like they have to cross across Nehekhara. So I felt this would be a good scenario. I've got this group of savage orcs and forest goblins that are trying to make their way to the old world to join in the rampaging and the looting and the plundering and all that. But on their way, they found out there is a big nasty desert and they start running out of water and they really need to get to this oasis, which is guarded by these horrible undead constructs. So here we have the forces involved. First off, we have the bad guys, 3 tomb scorpions, real straightforward. And here we have my orcs and goblins. This side gets 250 points worth of troops. They can have up to 1 hero and 1 champion. In the very center I have a hero. I have a savage orc big boss. His name is Bloodgush Grimpot. He is equipped with a great weapon, a shield, and war paint. A bunch of my guys have shields. They are going to do no good whatsoever in this game. The parry ward save is not a thing in 6th edition. Instead, if you have a hand weapon and a shield, you get +1 armor save. The Tomb Scorpion strength is 5, they're going to punch through any armor that I have. And besides, the orcs all have choppas, they don't count as having hand weapons, so they don't get the armor bonus anyway. I didn't take a champion, instead I went with numbers. We have 8 savage orcs with war paint, bows, and shields. Then we have 15 goblins with short bows, and 13 goblins with shields and hand weapons. That puts me at 248 points. That's enough points to actually get 1 more goblin with a hand weapon and shield, but I didn't have the model, so oh well. I'm sure we'll be fine. So here's everything all set up for the game. The orcs and goblins are going to start on the northern table edge, and as you can see, I brought too many of them. They don't actually all fit on that 24-inch space. It's a 2-foot by 2-foot board, and there's just too many guys. So what I did was, anyone that didn't fit on that front line, I put in the back, just a touch off the table. The Tomb Scorpions can deploy below the sands, but I don't think that's actually helpful. They've got a movement of 7, and if you entomb below the sands, there's a chance that they just die when they're coming up, so I don't think that's really necessary. You probably want to have the Tomb Scorpions kill off as many of the opposing troops as fast as possible. So they can get deployed normally anywhere between the southern edge of the oasis, see that oasis, I made that specially for this scenario, and the southern board edge. So there's a bunch of special rules for this game, most of which involve the orcs and goblins and how they're dying of thirst. So at the beginning of each of my turns, I roll a d6 for each model. On the roll of a 1, they die. Not a wound, not an injury roll, nothing, they're just a casualty. They couldn't quite make it to that oasis, very sad. Next off, they're very tired and thirsty from wandering through the desert for a long time. They are -1 weapon skill, ballistic skill, and initiative, and they also can't march, or run as it's known in Skirmish. If they make contact with the oasis, then they are considered to have drank a bunch of water, and they no longer have to roll a d6 to find out if they die at the beginning of each round, but they still can't march and they still have their stats reduced. The Orcs and Goblins get the first turn. The game lasts for 8 rounds. If at the end of that time, the Orcs and Goblins still have 25% of their troops or more remaining, then they have won. If not, the Tomb Scorpions win and they drag our bones back to the necropolises and whatever terrible things they do with them, then that just happens. The attacking force, the Orcs and Goblins, have 37 models, so 25%, that means I have to have at least 10 guys survive. So it's an interesting setup. You have quite a few choices when you're making your army. You could go for numbers like I did. There's a couple of problems with that. Obviously, when you're dying of thirst, a sixth of your army is going to go away every turn on average, so you're going to be losing a lot of guys. They could be really cheap guys, but you're still losing the same percentage of them as you would if they were more elite. You also start getting in each other's way. It gets harder to get to that oasis because you just have more bodies. You have to spread out further. It's going to take some of those troops longer to get to the oasis, and they're just going to block your path. You're also going to be bad at fighting these scorpions, who are not bad in combat at all. I always thought they were one of the more cost-efficient things in the Tomb King's army list. They are movement 7, they have fear, killing blow, poison. They have a weapon skill of 4, toughness and strength of 5, and 4 attacks. They're pretty good. Plus, they have fear, immunity, psychology, all the normal undead stuff, and a 5+ armor save. So the goblins are almost certainly going to be no help whatsoever in these fights. The savage orcs are gonna be okay. They've got frenzy, so they're immune to fear. They get a +1 strength on the first round of combat because they only got the 1 choppa, and they have a 6+ ward save, which could help. They're also toughness 4, and with the injury rolls, they might last in combat a while. Nice thing about Orcs and Goblins in Skirmish too, you don't have to take any animosity checks because they're all just units of 1, so you don't have to roll for that. And also, since you don't have combat results, the Savage Orcs are never going to lose their frenzy because they're never going to actually lose in combat. The downside is that after the first round, then the normal Savage Orcs drop down to strength 3, which really isn't going to do much against these Tomb Scorpions. And of course, you have to charge. There's no leadership check like there is in 8th edition. So if there's an opportunity to go to the oasis and stop dying of thirst, but there's a Tomb Scorpion within 8 inches, the Savage Orcs are going to haul off and attack the Tomb Scorpion instead of drinking water. A lot of my guys do have bows, which I figure isn't bad because since I can't march, I'm always going to be able to shoot an arrow if I have a target. At strength 3, it's not going to do a whole lot though. I did have the option of going more elite with this force. I could have taken Savage Orc Boar Boys, I could have put my big boss on a chariot, which I was really tempted to do. You don't have to take troops on foot. They would have been better at fighting the Tomb Scorpions and they would have gotten to the oasis quicker, but you just have a 1 in 6 chance of losing one of those expensive guys at the beginning of every round. That just made me a little nervous. So we went with this. As for the Tomb Scorpions, since this is a solo game, I'm giving them a simple AI to follow. They are going to charge or move towards the closest model every round. In close combat, they are going to divide up all their attacks against everyone that they're fighting, randomly determining any extra attacks. And that's really it. These Tomb Scorpions are really tough. They don't need to be sneaky or stealthy or anything like that. And with the killing blow rule, it's worth dividing up their attacks anyway because they can take out multiple characters in one round of combat. So the attackers get the first turn, so it's time for the Orcs and Goblins. And the first thing that we have to do, we don't have animosity rolls, but we do have dying of thirst rolls, so it's kind of the same, only worse. So I roll a d6 for every model. On a 1 they perish, and it doesn't go great. I lose 2 Forest Goblin Archers, 2 normal Forest Goblins, but I also lose 2 Savage Orcs, so fully a quarter of my normal Savage Orcs die in this first round before I do anything. I don't love that. They're better at fighting, they're better at shooting, and they're positioned closer to the oasis than the Goblins. But at least I didn't have my big boss go and die, which would have been really bad. So in the movement phase, there is no reason to be subtle. Everyone moves forward as far as they can, which unfortunately is only 4 inches. The only difference is that some of the Savage Orcs at the edge of the oasis hang back a little bit because I want the Goblins to be in front. I want the Tomb Scorpions to charge into the Goblins first, hopefully kill them off, and then maybe countercharge with the Savage Orcs. So that does slow down the Savage Orcs a little bit, but I think it's a good trade-off. In the shooting phase, those that can draw a line of sight go ahead and fire their bows. Unfortunately, the goblins need 6s and then 4s in order to hit, and then they need 6s to wound, and then the Tomb Scorpions have a 5-up armor save, so I don't get anything through. Although one of the goblins does hit and wound, but then it's saved, which is disappointing. The remaining 6 orcs also need 6s to hit, and they don't cause any damage either. So it's over to the Tomb Scorpion turn, and here they come. I'm treating the oasis as impassable. The scenario doesn't actually specify what it should be. I think the scenario would work just fine if it were difficult terrain or even open. I went with impassable. I'm sure it's fine. It adds different tactical elements depending on how you want to do it, but I don't think it really disrupts the nature of the game. The Scorpion on the left charges into the nearest Forest Goblin. He passes his fear test, does his stand and shoot, which of course doesn't do anything. The Scorpion on the right does much the same thing, but that Goblin fails his fear test and takes off, so he's being charged by a fear-causing enemy which has a larger unit strength than he does, which was a thing back in 6th edition. So he fails his fear test and he just leaves. He rolls high enough to just take off the board, so I've lost another guy. The Tomb Scorpion has a chance to redirect, which he does so. He goes and redirects into the next Forest Goblin Archer, who manages to pass his fear test. His stand and shoot also misses. The third Scorpion doesn't quite have the movement to get all the way around the oasis to attack my guys, so he just rumbles forward like you see. We move on to the hand-to-hand combat phase, and things go about as well as they possibly could have for me. The Tomb Scorpions hit the goblins on 3s and wound them on 2s, and of course poison, meaning they automatically cause a wound on the roll of a 6, and killing blow, meaning they automatically execute them on the roll of a 6 to wound, but none of that comes to pass. The one on the left stuns the goblin, so he is face down, and the one on the right only manages to knock down a goblin. I guess stumbling around in the desert for this amount of time makes you tough. So absolutely great that I didn't lose a guy in this hand-to-hand combat phase. Let's move on to the next turn, Orcs and Goblins, turn 2. First thing we have to do is find out who dies of thirst, and I roll pretty well. Only 1 goblin and 2 goblin archers end up dying. One of the ones that died was the goblin that was just knocked down in the close combat phase, the Scorpion that you see on the left. His goblin that he was trying to eat perishes of thirst while he's trying to get him. Poor little guy, I guess that was just too much for him. But moving on, it's time for the Savage Orcs to charge. So my big boss, Bloodgush Grimpot, goes and charges the far Scorpion. The main reason I'm doing this is because when he charges over there, he can touch the oasis and no longer has to roll on that dying of thirst chart. He takes 2 Savage Orcs along with him because I still feel, even though that guy is fairly tough, I feel that I really need to gang up on these Scorpions to have any real chance. The remaining 3 Savage Orcs charge that left-hand Scorpion in the flank. We're going to try and rescue our stunned Goblin who rolls over to knocked over. And the Goblin tide just kind of flows around all these guys trying to get to the oasis. As you can see, I've got 3 Goblins that do manage to get to the oasis and get a nice drink. I've marked them with little white dice. You'll also notice that the Scorpion on the right-hand side is not in combat at all, since the Goblin he was fighting died of thirst. I'm going to try and shoot him a bunch. In the event the shooting completely fails, remember all my guys are -1 ballistic skill. It was always going to be a tall order. In the hand-to-hand combat phase, we're going to start with Bloodgush's combat. He completely fails to cause any damage. He's -1 weapon skill, meaning he's got 4 attacks that are going to hit on 4s, and then with his strength of 6, strength 4 plus 2 for the great weapon, he will be wounding on 3s. And in 6th edition, when you charge in with a great weapon, you still get to strike first. Warhammer Fantasy is kind of back and forth as to whether that happens. Anyway, his 2 Savage Orc buddies also completely fail, which is really bad news. In return, the Scorpion doesn't cause any damage to my big boss, which is nice, but he manages to land 2 killing blows on the Savage Orcs, and so they are both dead until I remember that they do have their ward saves, and so I go and roll those. Unfortunately, I roll those after this picture is taken, but one of them actually does make his ward save, so I only lose one of them, but still, that was a real poor opening combat round. And the other combat doesn't go a whole lot better. One of my Savage Orcs manages to get a crit, meaning he rolls a 6 to wound, and so causes 2 wounds to the guy with no armor save possible. So that's real nice. So there's half that Scorpion's wounds gone. Unfortunately, the rest of the Savage Orcs can't cause any more damage, and in return, the Scorpion goes and kills one of my Savage Orcs outright and stuns the other. Again with a killing blow. These scorpions have been real good about rolling these 6s to wound. So that's bad news. I've lost a lot of my savage orcs, and now they're going to be down to strength 3. So now it is the scorpion's turn, and the one on the far right goes and wheels and charges the nearest goblin. He fails his fear test because he is too far away from my big boss leader. So he has to go on his leadership of 6 as opposed to my leader's leadership of 8. So he takes off. The scorpion then redirects into the next goblin on the line. That guy does manage to pass his fear test, but it's not looking great for him. We're on to the hand-to-hand combat phase, and I forgot how tough these goblins are. The Tomb Scorpion charges in, but only manages to knock down that goblin. How did I lose so many Savage Orcs, and the Scorpion just sort of push these goblins around? It doesn't seem right at all. In the combat with my big boss, the Scorpion goes first now and kills the Savage Orc that got lucky by passing his ward save last round, so now he's dead. Fortunately, Bloodgush himself doesn't take any damage. He swings back with that great weapon and only does 1 point of damage, which isn't great. In the other combat, we have a Tomb Scorpion who is fighting a stunned Savage Orc, a knocked down Goblin, and one Savage Orc still fighting, so he has to dump all 4 attacks into the standing Savage Orc. And wouldn't you know, he gets another killing blow, and so lops off that guy's head. So it is Orc and Goblin round 3, and in the beginning of the round, a couple of good things happen. First off, the fleeing Goblin rallies, which is nice. Second off, only one guy dies of thirst, and it is this Goblin right here. Granted, I'm rolling less dice, a bunch of my guys are dead, some even got some water already, but still, I got off pretty light in that whole course of dice rolls. So I'm not going to do any charges this round. The priority is going to be get water and then stay alive. So most of my goblins go and manage to get themselves a drink. The 2 knockdown goblins stand up to face these scorpions all on their own. The Savage Orc rolls over to simply being knocked down. There's no one to shoot at because all the enemies are currently eating my other greenskins, so we move on to hand-to-hand. Starting with this one, just look at this guy, look at this goblin. Facing the scorpion again, and again he's only knocked down. We're all rooting for you, little guy. There's a war boss in the making if you survive this fight. Not so much for this goblin over here. Can't get lucky 2 rounds in a row, and he is devoured. Just grabbed by the pincers and popped into this Tomb Scorpion's mouth, and that's it for him. Now over to this fight here, which is making me really nervous. The Scorpion, of course, gets to strike first. 4 attacks. The good news is that he's hitting on 4s and wounding on 4s. So any given round, he's probably not going to cause a lot of damage, but you never know. With the poison and the killing blow, he can end this fight really quick. However, this Scorpion does me a huge favor and misses Bloodgush Grimpot with all 4 attacks. That is 1 nimble Savage Orc. In return, I only get 1 hit, but that ends up being a crit, so I'm going to plant another 2 wounds on this Tomb Scorpion. Back over to the Tomb Scorpion turn, and that one over on the right continues chewing through my line of goblins. He's going to charge the next one in the pack, who passes his fear and gets ready. Directly onto the hand-to-hand combat phase, and man, Forest Goblins are the best. 4 attacks come in on this guy, and all it manages to do is stun the goblin, which isn't great, but a lot better than my Savage Orcs have been doing. Speaking of, over here we've got the Tomb Scorpion who is fighting a knocked down Forest Goblin and a knocked down Savage Orc. So here's where I find something out. I go into the skirmish rules to find out if all you need to do to take someone out of action is to wound someone who is knocked down. You don't roll an injury roll, you just take them out if you get a wound through. I believe the reason I have this question is because in Mordheim it actually changed. They started with you make an injury roll as normal, and then they errated it to if you get a wound on a knockdown enemy, then they're just taken out of action without going to the injury roll chart. Guess what I found out? A bunch of that stuff doesn't exist in the skirmish rules. In Mordheim, if you're in combat with a knocked down model, and there's not a standing model in combat with you. If there's a standing model, then you have to attack the standing model. But if there's no standing model, you automatically hit any attacks that are put into the knockdown model. And like I said earlier, if you manage to wound that model, then they're taken out of action immediately. With a stunned model, it's even worse. If you can put an attack into a stunned model, then you don't need to roll to hit, to wound, or anything. They're just immediately taken out of action. None of those rules seem to exist in Warhammer Skirmish. Reading that section, it looks like the only bad things that happen if you're knocked down or stunned is you don't get to attack. The knockdown stun models don't attack. The attacking models still have to roll to hit and wound and all that stuff is normal. I had no idea that was the case. I just saw the knockdown stun section in the Warhammer Skirmish rules. It looks like it was cut and pasted directly from Mordheim. I thought, okay, great, it's just the same. Move on. Now, I really like to follow the letter of the rules. I like to do things as they are written. However, this threw me. I just don't really know why they made this change. I mean, it can't be really a space issue. They put in lots of weird things about what happens when you're shot on an upper elevation, or diving charges, or hiding, or all little extra rules that I almost never use. So they chose to have it this way, but I don't like it. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. So here's the deal, everybody. Same as all the other scenarios that I've been doing so far, I am going to keep it like I've been doing it. A knockdown model is hit automatically, and if they're wounded, they're taken out of action. A stunned model is taken action automatically if an opponent can direct a hand-to-hand combat attack against them. Does this radically change the way Warhammer Skirmish works? Probably not. It makes tough models a lot easier to take out. If you have a really high toughness, high armor value, you have a good chance of surviving even if you're knocked down or stunned. On the other hand, these expensive models, now it gets a lot more difficult for them to make their way through cheaper models. You can't just automatically execute knocked down or stunned models in front of you. You could really get tied up by really cheap garbage troops. So we're going to do that the Mordheim way. Leave a comment if you have a strong feeling about that one way or the other. Tell me if I missed something. I read through that section over and over again. It didn't seem right to me, but as far as I can tell, it is. But anyway, back to this. We've got this Tomb Scorpion. There are two models knocked down in front of him. He puts two attacks into both. They both automatically hit. They both manage to wound, unsurprisingly, and so both models are dead, out of action, gone. My last normal Savage Orc is off the table. But here we come to the good news. Bloodgush Grimpot is unhurt by the Scorpion's attacks again, and so on his return attack, he manages to take off the thing's last wound. Now, unfortunately, I only get the knockdown result, so there he is getting clocked by my big boss's big stone club and getting flipped over to the knockdown position. But the good thing is that I did this in the Tomb Scorpion turn, meaning he doesn't get a chance to stand back up again before I attack again. Because we are back to the Orc and Goblin turn, and again, no one's going to charge anybody. Instead, the last of my goblins are going to get the drink of water, so I'm going to take off all those little white dice, because we're not making any further dying of thirst rolls. I mean, I did make some at the beginning of this round. No one died, which was nice, and now all my goblins are going to scatter. I don't think I have much of a chance of killing all these Tomb Scorpions, so what I'm going to do is just try and move enough goblins far enough away so that the Scorpions can't kill enough of my guys before the game ends. Again, I got to keep 10 of these people alive. There is that Scorpion that just killed off the Savage Orc and the Forest Goblin. He's not currently fighting anyone in hand-to-hand combat, so I can shoot at him. Unfortunately, again, the shooting doesn't cause any damage. And over in the hand-to-hand combat phase, I did have a goblin that was fighting a giant scorpion. He was stunned the round before, he moved over to knock down. Turns out that's still not a great position to be in. The scorpion just stabs that guy to death while he's on the ground. But in better news, my Savage Orc Big Boss is having a really good day. He's all happy. Here's a knockdown Tomb Scorpion right in front of him, so I don't have to worry about rolling to hit. Instead, I've got 4 Strength 6 attacks coming at this thing, and all I have to do is wound with one of them, and that'll take it off the board. He manages to do it, and just in a frenzied flurry of blows, just smashes this thing into a grotesque pulp. So that's really nice, primarily because it just reduces the number of my guys that these scorpions can kill every round. But we're now back to the Tomb Scorpion turn, and the Tomb Scorpion that you see on the right charges the next closest goblin who fails his fear test, even though my big boss is still within 6 inches. Anyway, he runs off the table, so he counts as a casualty. The Scorpion then redirects into another Forest Goblin archer who does pass his fear test. The other Tomb Scorpion goes into an ordinary Forest Goblin who passes his fear test. And so here we are in the hand-to-hand combat phase. In the combat over on the left, that Forest Goblin just stunned. Not bad at all. The other one, less lucky. He takes 2 killing blows, which is bad news for anybody, especially if you're a goblin. He is snipped into 3 equal-sized pieces and expires. So we are back to Orc and Goblin round 5. We are getting close. But guess what? Chief Grimpot is still frenzied, so he still has to charge. So he thunders into that Tomb Scorpion, currently trying to stab that wily Forest Goblin on the ground. I don't mind this at all. That Tomb Scorpion only has 2 wounds left. This combat could go okay. And even if it doesn't, it might be okay if I just take up this Tomb Scorpion's time or just take a long time dying. Anything to slow down the amount of casualties that I take every round. As for the rest of the Orc and Goblin movement phase, which I forgot to take a picture of, my guys just continue to scatter except for a pair of goblins which park themselves in front of that Tomb Scorpion nearby the fight with the chief. I'm going to sacrifice those 2 to give the rest of them time to get away. These scorpions are still movement 7, so they still have a good chance of running down any of these goblins who still can't march no matter where they go. So for the time being, I'm going to pin this guy in place, and maybe that'll help me get a little further away. This guy is not in combat right now, I can still shoot, but of course the shooting doesn't do anything. The hand-to-hand combat phase, however, that is a different story. Charging models get to strike first even if they're armed with a great weapon, so in comes Bloodgush Grimpot, and he manages to hit with all 4 attacks. He is really powering up here. He's got the scent of blood, and he is definitely waking up. Those 4 hits translate into 3 wounds, which means that I get to make 2 rolls on the injury chart, and I end up stunning this guy. Now it is the Scorpion turn up next, so that stunned Scorpion then flips over to being knocked down, and the other Scorpion charges into my first Goblin over there who manages to pass his fear test. And in the hand-to-hand combat phase, we are going to trade casualties, which is only going to work out in the Orcs and Goblins' favor. Bloodgush Grimpot manages to get that wound through to execute that Tomb Scorpion, and the Tomb Scorpion has no trouble dispatching the Goblin in front of him. So see that little knocked over goblin in the middle of the photo? That guy was the one who was stunned by the Tomb Scorpion a little bit ago before his chief rushed in and smashed its brains in. So that is one lucky goblin being saved by a savage orc. I mean, yeah, he might get eaten by that same chief in the victory feast, but for the time being, lucky goblin. But that was Tomb Scorpion turn. Now we're back to Orc and Goblin turn 6, and I still have a very frenzied chief. In fact, he's probably getting more frenzied. He's got Tomb Scorpion goop all over him and really living his best life. So he has to charge into this unhurt Tomb Scorpion right in front of him, and I have a choice to make. I've got a couple of goblins around, but I'm kind of running out. I could just charge the chief in, let him deal with the Tomb Scorpion a while, and just be satisfied with having around 10-ish, 12-ish goblins scattered around the battlefield. Hopefully the Tomb Scorpion can't kill enough of them off in the time remaining. But if this combat goes poorly, he might be able to. He might be able to kill off the chief, charge goblin, he runs off because of fear, charges another goblin, he still might do the damage. So what I do instead is the chief convinces some nearby goblins to charge in with him. One of them's too scared. I've got 3 goblins that I declare charges with. One of them fails his fear test and won't go in, but 2 others join the chief in this attack. Even though they're almost certainly going to die, the idea is that they are going to absorb attacks which might otherwise attack my Savage Orc Big Boss, which will draw out this combat and leave the remaining goblins to survive till the end of the game. Here you see my remaining goblins scattering to the 4 corners of the board, just trying to stay alive. You'll also notice there are 11 of them, so I am cutting this real thin. If I had managed to charge with all the goblins that I had declared the charge with, then basically I couldn't lose a single goblin past what was in combat with the Tomb Scorpion. What I'm saying is I've committed myself to this combat. This has to go well. I can't roll a bunch of poisons and killing blows and get all these guys executed, because I do not have the spare goblins to stand up to 2 more rounds of Tomb Scorpion. So moving on to the hand-to-hand combat phase, and I roll randomly to see who gets to strike first in the combat phase, because I've got 3 charging models, they all get to strike first. We'll find out who goes first. Turns out the 2 goblins get to strike first. I would rather it have been the other way around, because there's a chance that Grimpot could have done 4 wounds and left the Tomb Scorpion stunned or something, and the goblins could have finished it off. But that's not what happened. However, one of my goblins with their 1 measly weapon skill 1, strength 3 attack, manages to hit. He needs a 5 or 6 to hit, manages to wound, needs a 6 to wound, and the stupid Tomb Scorpion goes and makes its armor save of 5 up. But still, plucky little goblin, good job. The big boss unfortunately only manages to cause 1 wound to the Tomb Scorpion, which is a little disappointing. But in return, the Scorpion itself only manages to knock down a single goblin, which was really lucky for me. These Tomb Scorpions have had some poor rolling throughout this game. On to Tomb Scorpion, round 6, and we get straight into hand-to-hand combat. The Tomb Scorpion is going to go first, but guess what? It has to attack the standing goblin and the big boss, but he misses completely. No damage done. This is looking really good for my guys. The goblin goes first, of course, because now we're going to strike in initiative order. The goblin's going to miss, not do any damage, but Chief Bloodgush Grimpot manages to get 3 hits and wound with 2 of them and crit with the other one for a total of 4 damage, meaning I get to roll twice on the injury table. I roll a 5 or 6 and I kill the Tomb Scorpion. That is it. The Orcs and Goblins have won. I've won another solo scenario. Hooray me. That was really kind of a nerve-wracking scenario. You start out the game and your guys are just dying in droves. Their heads are getting snipped off by Tomb Scorpions. They're dying of thirst. They're running away because of failed fear tests when the Tomb Scorpions charge in. You rack up a lot of casualties really early on, especially amongst the Savage Orcs. Thankfully, my chief just poured on the gas and killed off all 3 of those Tomb Scorpions. That guy is a hero. It could have easily gone a different way, though. At any time, one of those Tomb Scorpions could have just gotten their rolls together and boop, killing blowed that big boss out of existence. And then I would have been in real trouble. I think there's a lot of luck in this scenario. I think it can definitely go either way. I'm interested to find out how other forces do, maybe more elite forces, elves, chaos, dwarves would be interesting. Again, bringing the chariot or cavalry might be interesting too. Obviously, if a human player was controlling the Tomb Scorpions instead of using this basic AI that I worked out, I think it would have been a lot tougher. I think a human player would have dumped all the attacks into the big boss as soon as possible to try and get that guy out of the way. Also would have done things like charge multiple goblins at the same time. But end of the day, I don't think this was a bad scenario at all, and I think I can recommend it to you guys. As far as moving forward goes, we have scheduled our first in-person gaming session for June 26th. So those of you who are looking forward to in-person games, tired of the solo games, that's a time you can look forward to. After that, I can start releasing battle reports about those. I think we're going to do a series of small games, just try and get back into the swing of it, remember how this game is played, and then maybe the next month we will finish off our campaign. Thanks for watching, thanks for bearing with me. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can leave those below, especially if you have any opinions about the knockdown stunned interactions with hit rolls and injury rolls. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one.